Hi, I'm Keith Cotter and welcome to the HSB Academy tutorial session. In this session we're going to look at validations. A validation is your means to be able to check your model for optimal design, to be able to check for scenarios if you've made any mistakes or errors on your design, and this will flag up in those situations. It's completely customizable, the validations, and it can be set up to the way you want to check your design model. So let's jump in and see how we can do this. So I have a simple stick frame wall here with an opening, and we're going to use that as the basis to show you how you work with the validation manager. Validations are found under the HSB output ribbon, and we have both the manager and the inspector. The manager is how we set up each of the individual rules for our validation, and the inspector is how we run these validations afterwards. So the first thing we need to do is go to manager, and this will start up the validation manager screen. Now before we proceed with any of this, the first and foremost important thing is two things need to be checked. First of all, you should check the units that you're working with, either metric or US units, feet and inches. And the second thing is you should have your current validation manager pointing at your current company library. By default, when you install the stick frame solution for Revit, it will always point at the C drive HSB company, but you can point that at your own company library. Okay, let's get stuck in. First of all, on the left here, you set yourself up with a group. So I'm going to basically rename this group, and I'm going to call it hsbStickFrame tutorial, something like this. And the group is now created. This will be important because you can create multiple groups here on the left based on what you want to validate upon. So you can really organize yourself in this instance. You can add and remove as well the different groups. So for this stick frame tutorial, this is where we add the various extensions for the validation. An extension is natural validation in this case. And when we go to add an extension, you can see here we've got a number of default extensions that you can already run. So I'm going to show you how you set up a simple first validation, and that is we're going to use this one here called beam section convention. And what is the beam section convention? I can enlarge that screen and it says that beam sections comply with the convention height is always greater than the width. Now this will be an important one for any CNC operating situations, that we basically make sure that our beam height is always greater than our width in this case. So I'm going to add that, and when I add it, it essentially is automatically enabled, so it's ready to be run. And it could also potentially have settings, but in this case I have no settings for this particular validation, so I don't need to do anything down here. But however, if I now add another extension, and let's just say beams have a valid length check. What is that? Well, this one checks if the length of the beam is with a valid length with a min and max length in this case. So I'm going to add that one. Now suddenly when I add this, I currently have some extension. And what this one is going to do, it's going to ensure that a beam length is never exceeding a maximum length. So I'm going to say maybe 10,000 here, and a minimum length here. I'm going to put in a value of 250 millimeters in this particular instance. So you can continue to add various validations down here in each of these different defaults that we've set up. But for now, I'm finished with validation and I'm finished adding, and basically I can now continue on. So at this moment, I'm now going to say apply it and say OK. So at this moment, I have run no validation. Okay. All I've done is set up the validation, and they will always be there for future models that I would then work in the future. So the next thing I want to do is run the inspector. Now when running the inspector, it will prompt you for the group that you want to use, and that's why I asked you to set up a group earlier on. And the one we set up was hsbStickFrame tutorial. I'm going to select that and I'm going to say select from containers. But before I do that, there's probably one thing I should have done before that, and that is on the console here for element number 3, just purely for clarity reasons, I'm going to turn off each of the zones here because I want to show you in clarity how the validation works. Remember, the validations I've just set up are purely for beams, but you can run validations on practically anything. Sheets, elements, tools, whatever you need to check in your model, a validation can actually check that for you. So it should save you a huge amount of time, essentially, if you are manually checking your designs afterwards. This will take out all of that manual checking. So a hugely important tool. So now we're going to run the inspector once more again. I'm going to pick that group, StickFrame tutorial. I'm going to select the item containers, select it from the model and finish. And now what essentially happens is I get a reported result. So here you can see that on this reported result from the validation inspector, it tells me first of all that the validations for all tests, and I can limit this down to what has been successful and what has failed, or it can show me a result of all the tests. The current section convention validation, which was checking that the height was always greater than the width, has passed because it's shown as a green arrow or a green colored circle in this particular case. However, the valid length check has suddenly thrown back 3 different beams that have not passed. Now, if you remember, I set the setting at maximum length 10 meters, minimum length 250. Now, I purposely did that to show you why it would pick this up, because it's these beams here it's going to pick up. But in a normal design situation, I don't know this, okay? So how do I know which beams this is referring to? By the way, the reason it's saying -1 in this case is because I have not numbered my beams in this project. By the way, that is another validation that you could also add here that would check to make sure the beams are all numbered. So if this project had already been numbered, it would have shown me the beam number as well. That was not passing the validation. But this is where it really gets interesting now, validation, because I can open this out, and by selecting this arrow here, it automatically jumps and highlights the beam that has failed in this case. And what you can essentially do at this stage is now identify that beam and either one, rectify the situation, okay, and either make that beam larger or smaller, and essentially continue to cycle through in each case, and it will find the beams that are not in the passing result. And the nice thing here afterwards is once you have done the check, there's no problem to rerun the validation once more and run it completely over the model. And essentially what you will then get is a full confidence that your model is checked optimally before it's sent to any manufacturing or fabrication process. I'm Keith Cotter. Thank you for watching and hope to see you in future sessions.